Hi, everybody, and welcome to the first part of my Soulwork course. Um, of course, the first thing you want to know is what is Soulwork? In order to answer that question, I need to go first into some parts of theoretical physics. And in the next lecture, I will go into some parts of psychology in order to give you the most complete answer possible. So when you learn physics in school, what you will learn is Newtonian physics, the laws of how bodies move, interact, how we can propel a body in space. Basically, when you send a rocket to space, you count exactly where it will land, exactly which speed it will go at. That is Newtonian physics. If you don't push an object, it's not going to move. If if you apply a force to an object, there will be this equation. The force is equal the mass of that object times its acceleration. This is Newtonian physics. This is what we learn. Things in the physical world act in accordance with Newtonian physics. Objects don't disappear and reappear. And if they did, we would question our sanity. We're used to the laws of the world being what they are, and this is what gives us a certain sense of security. When things don't obey the laws of physics, we think either we're crazy or a miracle has happened, right? And either of those doesn't happen very often. All right. What if we go into more advanced physics? Physics of the theory of relativity, of quantum, right? We know that objects cannot go faster than light, and that is because all matter actually consists of light. Giving you a moment to process that. Mass of objects that have mass is basically condensed energy. And in its purest form, all energy is light. When that energy slows down, it creates physical objects. And that could give us a little bit of an insight into what happened in the first days of creation when God created light first, and then he condensed it into physical matter. Nothing can go faster than its components, and if all things, all matter, is made out of light, it means that nothing can travel faster than light. There's this fascinating TED Talk, which I would like to recommend. It's Richard Dawkins. He has a few fascinating observations as to why we can't walk through a wall. We know that the most of the space inside an atom is actually empty, meaning most of the space inside the wall is empty and most of the space inside my body is empty. So theoretically, we should be able to just walk through the wall because most of it is empty space, right? But it doesn't happen. He explains why not. Right. So here we go into quantum mechanics, where things stop to make sense the way they do in the physical world. Quantum mechanics is the science of particles. And it all started about 100 years ago when scientists of the time, Niels Bohr and others, decided to send a particle of light through a screen with two slits, as we see over here, right? Photon is one particle of light. The thing is, with particles, they could be either a particle or a wave. If we observe them as a particle, they will behave as a particle. If we look out for wave qualities, we will see those. The thing is that we cannot observe that simultaneously. It's not possible with the tools of physics today to observe them simultaneously. Right. So when they did that, when they sent photons through the screen, they found a phenomenon of interference, meaning they would send one photon through a screen with two slits, and this photon has to make a choice which hole it will go through. But what they saw on the screen behind is that it looked as if it went through both slits at the same time. and it created a pattern of a band and interference. Now, in Newtonian physics, in the world as we observe it, no object could split and interfere with itself, right? Um, Imagine a pencil going through paper in two places and then reuniting at the end. We would have to break the pencil and will not go back together, right? Something here is wrong. They almost couldn't believe their results. In quantum physics, it's possible. And the question of which path will the photon take remained a question. It was possible for a photon to go through both holes at the same time. So this is where the scientists discovered something called the observer effect. When they sent an observer, when one of the scientists was watching the experiment, the photon chose one hole, and it tended to prefer the hole which the observer was watching. And there was no interference pattern to show that the photon has gone through two holes simultaneously, meaning it's as if the photon could read the mind of the observer and choose and decide which hole to go through based on his opinion. And the effect of interference was destroyed by observation. Right, this sounds crazy. I'm sure the scientists were doubting their sanity quite a bit 100 years ago when they first discovered this phenomenon. Right. Simply by observing a particle's path, even if that observation should not disturb the particle's motion, we change the outcome. Think about it for a second. Human mind can determine where the particle will go. They came to a fascinating conclusion. Observations not only disturb what has to be measured, they produce it. We compel a quantum particle to assume a definite position, to act as a wave or as a particle. If we're watching for a wave, it will act as a wave. If we're watching for a particle, it will act as one. In other words, this means we ourselves produce the results of the measurements. Again, if we can control reality just by observing it in a certain way, then what's objective reality? Does it even exist if we can change it by looking at it? Right? Meaning we can affect things just by our thoughts, by our attention. Attention is a key tool in Soulwork. We'll get to that in a second. Right, you all know about this famous experiment, right? A Schrodinger's cat. What happens here is, of course, nobody ever did this for real. They would supposedly they would take a cat and put it into a hermetically sealed box, and in it there's also some radioactive material. Okay, and it decays. All radioactive materials tend to decay. It has a half-life. And there's exactly a 50% chance that the radioactive material will decay enough to destroy the box that it's in and kill the cat. Right? Not sure as to the exact mechanics. And there's 50% chance that the cat is dead, and there's a 50% chance that the cat is alive. Right? So until we open the box, we don't know whether the cat is dead or alive, which means that from the point of view of the observer, the cat is simultaneously dead and alive until we open the box. Of course, no such a cat could exist, but this is just a bit of a story to explain how quantum physics works. In the quantum world, objects can be in many places at the same time and in two states at the same time. It doesn't make sense to us in our Newtonian physical world, but in the quantum world, it's possible. Now, instead of applying the quantum theory to a particle or to a cat, let's apply it to our mind. The physicists are still arguing about the results of those quantum experiments and what actually happens there. How does the mind affect the particle and force it to act either as a wave or as a particle? Um, at some point, you make a decision as to how you interpret those experiments. Obviously, for physicists who are believers in one way or another, it's much easier to deal with those things than for those who are atheists. But whichever way you look at it, basically you come to a conclusion that the mind and quantum mechanics, quantum particles are somehow connected. In the 1980s, the British physicist Roger Penrose suggested that the link might work in the other direction. Whether or not consciousness can affect quantum mechanics, he said, perhaps quantum mechanics is involved in consciousness. Now, why is that relevant? Now, the way our brain works is that it's both electric and chemical. When we have a thought, a reaction to something, the electric impulse will travel all the way through the neuron until the very end. And then, in order to connect to the muscle or the target organ or to another neuron, it will send a chemical signal instead of an electric one. Those chemical signals are called neurotransmitters. They send the message from neuron to neuron or from neuron to organ and cell. Whenever a thought wants to go, these molecules must go too. And without it, it's impossible. Meaning, every time we think, we're creating brain chemistry. Our response to stimuli depends on our interpretation. Whether stimulus is painful or pleasurable depends on us, how we interpret it. For somebody running for 50 minutes on the treadmill is pleasurable, while for others it's extremely painful. Or we might say it's first painful, then pleasurable. Maybe I feel good afterwards. It's up to our interpretation. Neurotransmitters also explain such tricks as camels chewing prickly plants and not getting injured. They simply don't feel it, right? Hmm. The same way, this could explain the placebo effect. When a person has a headache and they're given a sugar pill and they think they got a painkiller, the brain will command the release of endorphins and the pain will go away. This was tested with a morphine antidote, right? And morphine antidote stop the action of placebos, means placebo does produce some kind of chemical effect in the brain. Now, we all know stories of, a mother lifting a car to save a child that was trapped underneath or running into a burning building. And obviously, this woman would not be able to lift the car in her normal state. How does she do it when she knows that her child is under it? With a tremendous surge of adrenaline, right? But what produces that surge of adrenaline? How does the mind produce this thought, oh my God, my baby is in there, right? And that somehow creates a chemical response in the body. And then the mother is able to lift the car with that ton of adrenaline. How that happens, how the thought is translated into the chemical reaction is not known to science. Adrenaline is basically just a chemical pathway. It's a word in the language of our brain, and it's involved in how the mind speaks to the body. When scientists perform brain scans, such as MRI or CT scans, they see different areas lighting up with different emotions and memories, but they still don't know how that emotion or that memory is stored in the brain. That the flesh of the brain, the cells, the electric impulses, the neurotransmitters, where is the memory in all that? How is it coded in the brain, right? Scientists were astounded to discover that those neurotransmitters, which are molecules of language of the brain, were found on other organs as well, on receptors of all cells, meaning our immune system, our digestion, our muscles, they also have that language of communication with the brain. They're also intelligent. So here's a rule. Body has intelligence on the level of every cell. What happens is that our bodies are a 3D picture of what we are thinking and what we have been thinking. Every cell can send and receive many types of messages, but something has to create them and cause them to be sent, and it's the mind and not the physical brain. Analyzing the brain to find the mind is like breaking down the piano to find the music. Think about that for a second. What happens when we interpret reality through the senses? It's a function of the mind as well, and not just the brain. Animals see a different color scheme. Which ones of us see the world as it is, us or the animals? Bees see colors that we don't. They see ultraviolet and infrared, while some animals do. Which picture of the world is the real one? Just because we're human, we tend to assume that we see the world as it is. No, not at all. That's why the Kabbalah calls the world Hashem's mask, God's mask. It covers the truth. Our sensors, our organs of perception, are not quite sufficient to see the world exactly as it is. Let's see what that means, what that implies. Right, so here's some names of neurotransmitters if you want to go deeper into it. Right. So here I would like to tell you a story about how instant our reactions could be. One time we flew to England, and when we got back, it was about 5 in the morning. We're absolutely exhausted. It was a night flight. And the first thing that I did when we got home is, of course, fall into bed and try to catch some sleep, right? I had the baby. One of my kids was a baby. I took the baby with me, and the other kids went to sleep in their rooms. And suddenly I hear a scream, Mommy, there's a snake. Okay. I think I was in their room before my eyes were actually open. And what I discovered is that what they thought was a snake was actually a belt from my robe hanging out of the cupboard, out of the shelf. And they were exhausted, so they saw a snake. But my body reacted as it would do to a real snake. It was exactly the same stress, the same adrenaline, the same cortisol, the same horror as if there had been a real snake in my kid's room. There wasn't, but I didn't know it, right? So my body went through the whole reaction as if there had been a snake. Sometimes we stay in those states. Memory of an illness can cause it to persist, and that's why antidepressants sometimes lift the depression, but the person still doesn't look well because there's still the imprint of the illness, right? In quantum mechanics, things are not as straightforward in regular physics. In Newtonian physics, A leads to B. You fire a gun, the bullet will fly out. You throw a ball, it will fly, right? But if A is a thought and B is a neurotransmitter, we don't know how that happens. There's a quantum gap between thoughts and neurotransmitters. We don't know how thoughts cause the body to speak in its chemical language to itself, how it produces the neurotransmitters. And this, by the way, could also explain spontaneous remissions. Sometimes people who have cancer, they just recover overnight or almost, and usually it's because they believe they will. And sometimes the cancer will just stop growing, and the doctors give a person, don't know, a few months, and 8 years later, they're still here. And science cannot explain that. But quantum healing, quantum physics can. It's because our mind creates reality as it goes. If in this person's mind, there's absolutely no doubt that they will get better, sometimes, because there are other things involved in that as well, sometimes there will be a spontaneous remission. Deepak Chopra describes this in his book, Quantum Healing. He tells the story of a woman who had terminal cancer, and her kids decided not to tell her about it. Instead, they told her she had an infection. The doctors cooperated, they gave her antibiotics, and she was convinced that she got better. You know what? She did. Even though it doesn't make sense to our Newtonian physics minds, in quantum physics, it does make sense. And here we understand the words of Hashem in Parashat Bereshit, which is what we'll be reading next week. Hashem says to this newly created person, he says, Na'aseh Adam, let us create a man. So there are, of course, lots of discussions whom he said it to. Maybe he said it to the angels to show us a good example, because of course God created man entirely on his own, but he showed us how to be considerate, right? Really, he's speaking to each one of us. Na'aseh Adam, let us create a human. In cooperation with Hashem, we create ourselves, and that is our main task in this world. Here's a beautiful quote that I felt was appropriate. Quantum physics tells us that nothing that is observed is unaffected by the observer. That statement from science holds an enormous and powerful insight. It means that everyone sees a different truth because everyone is creating what they see. And this is, by the way, why I never argue with people whose beliefs differ from mine. I don't argue with believers because in their world, in their universe, that is the ultimate truth. This is what they create in their own world. In their world, vaccines are either safe or dangerous. In their world, don't know, the Quran is true or not. Yeah, I don't argue. This is what a person believes. This is their right to believe it because they're creating their universe. They live in a different universe from mine, and I accept people's opinions. Actually makes it easier not to argue if I know that to them this is their objective observable truth. Right. So here's another bit of relevant knowledge that also has to do with physics. We know that there's quantum mechanics. They're trying to create a quantum computer. There's entanglement. There's lots and lots of quantum things that the scientists are discovering. But if we apply it to our mind and talk about quantum emotions, we'll see that every emotion has a vibration, has a frequency, right? The thing is that we are not on any one frequency at any given time. We have more than one emotion at the same time. We might be feeling love and we might be feeling fear at the same time. We love somebody, but we're afraid of losing them. So our actual vibration will be a combination of all the things we're feeling. We have all these feelings inside us at the same time. If you ask a person, what are you proud of? What do you desire? What do you love? What brings you joy? That forces them to choose one of these vibrations, one of these feelings, and focus on them, on this vibration, on this feeling, on this emotion, and then their body will match that vibration. It's as if the other vibrations, the other feelings will disappear because of where our focus is. If you're watching, let's say you're participating in an experiment and they tell you, watch for the moment the rabbit will jump out of the cage. So you take all of your focus and sit there watching for the rabbit. If at the same time a burglar walks behind you, you will not notice them, or even in the periphery of your vision. We ignore things that we're not focusing on. And as we all know, anyone who has kids, anyone who's ever studied in school, we know that sometimes we just don't hear things that happened in class because we're focusing on something else. This is another uncomfortable human truth. We can focus only at one thing at a time. So all those people who are double screening or trying to tell you they're focusing while they're playing with something, not really. The focus will shift from one thing to another, but they're not entirely focused on the thing that they say they're focused on. Right. So when we choose one of these vibrations, it's as if the other ones disappear. And what people usually don't know is that we can shift our focus with a bit of practice. we can choose to pull out a different feeling from inside us, from that wellspring of feelings that are inside us. We can put one of them on the screen of our attention and perhaps keep it there and thus raise our vibration. Obviously, the higher the vibration, the better is our health. Right. And whatever you focus on will grow. As you know, when you spend the day in an anticipation of the party, all other things kind of drift into the background and the party assumes the ultimate importance. All right. We will talk in David Bohm and Carl Pribram in our next video. I don't want to make the videos too long, so I'm going to stop it here.